Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Sunday, January 28th, and today is the 114th day since October 7th. Yesterday, I had the privilege of spending some time with Alfred Street Baptist Church in Alexandria, Virginia. They finished up a 4-part series called Seminary Saturdays, where they were learning and studying together about the intersection of faith and politics, particularly as it relates to the Middle East and what's happening in response to Israel and its war on Hamas. And I'd encourage you, all of those 4 sessions are on the Alfred Street Baptist Church YouTube page. I'd encourage you to take a look at that. And I don't know about you, but as we continue in this work, it often feels quite hopeless. And someone yesterday, a couple of hours into the session, said, "Are you going to leave us with any hope?" And yet my invitation to us today, particularly as it's Sunday, and I try at least once a week to reflect a little bit on the Word of God, my invitation for us today is to enter into that groaning in our spirit. We've talked a lot over the past several months about lament, but I think, we talk a lot about hope being having faith in that which we do not see, but that longing for hope and that groaning that's in our spirit. The passage I want us to look at today is in Romans chapter 8. And it kind of talks about that groaning. And a lot of the things that we read in the news and that we're hearing about what's happening that I saw firsthand the last couple of weeks in the Middle East, they just provoke this, not only grief, but this, it's more than lament. It's this longing for things to be different. It compels us into action, but it's also this desire for things to just be different. And so I do want to highlight a couple of things that are happening in the news, and then I want us to look at Romans chapter 8. And I thought to myself also that as I was, teaching yesterday and as we're learning together, as I was sharing news about what's happening, I'm seeking to tell the truth as best as I understand it. And as we're learning together about the things that I'm witnessing, about what's happening, and in large part about things that we here in the United States are ignoring, about what we're not paying attention to, about the role that our US government is playing, and in large part about the role that the United States is contributing to, and even at times making the situation worse in terms of militarization. And I think part of the role that we need to play is acknowledging how bad the situation is before we can even seek to have hope or to look at what it might take to make the situation better. When I was first in ministry, one of my mentors was Nancy Ortberg, and she often talked about the work of Max Dupree, who was one of her mentors. And he'd written a lot of books about leadership, and he always said the first task of a leader is to define reality. And in this situation, I think defining reality means asking God to open our eyes to see what's happening from multiple perspectives, from multiple narratives, from multiple news sources, looking at facts, looking at statistics, being willing to look at truths that sometimes are painful to look at, the reality about what people in Israel are experiencing, Jews and Palestinians both who have been completely traumatized, the reality that still there are bodies from October 7th that have not yet been identified. The reality that anti-Semitism is growing around the world in an unprecedented way that poses real threats to the Jewish community worldwide. The reality that there remain more than 130 hostages, Israelis and internationals, who are in Gaza, some who already have been killed. Even that number is not necessarily an accurate number. The reality that more than 1.7 million people in Gaza have been displaced. Many are living in makeshift shelters. They don't have access to basic needs like water and food and healthcare. And as winter approaches, rain and bad weather is beating down upon them. The reality that tens of thousands of people in Gaza, civilians, have already been killed, more than 10,000 of whom are children. Many by bombs that have been made here in the United States. These are some of the realities of truth that just needs to be defined and understood. The reality that the International Court of Justice just determined that it's plausible that there is a possibility that what Israel has been doing in Gaza could be considered genocide. We know it's mass killings, but it could be genocide. Defining reality means not closing our eyes to the fact that the US has played a role, that we can't ignore that most of the countries in the world are calling for a multilateral comprehensive ceasefire where all parties, Hezbollah, Hamas, all militant groups, and the Israeli Defense Forces would lay down their arms and pursue negotiated settlements rather than militarization and violence. And the United States is only one of 10 countries in the UN General Assembly that voted against a ceasefire there. And all of this is in the midst of a rising death toll in Gaza, with more than 25,000 killed already and more than 1.2 thousand people having lost their lives in Israel. These are the horrors that are existing just in Israel and Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories alone, let alone in places where there's conflict in the rest of the world, which should not be ignored. Syria, other parts of the Middle East, let alone the DRC, in Congo and other parts of the world. And now accusations have been levied against certain staff members of UNRWA, the UN Refugee Agency, the Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, and several countries, including the United States, Canada, Australia, Britain, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Finland, just over the past 2 days have cut funding to UNRWA, which is one of the largest humanitarian actors in Gaza. It means that some of the most significant humanitarian assistance that's been offered in Gaza since October 7th, that funding is going to be cut significantly. UNRWA has been serving about 2 million of the 2.3 million people in Gaza, according to the head of UNRWA. He said, "I'm shocked. Decisions are being made based on alleged behavior of a few individuals as the war continues. The needs are deepening. Famine looms. Palestinians in Gaza did not need this additional collective punishment. This stains all of us." So as I was preparing and praying for my time yesterday at Alfred Street Baptist Church, Romans 8 was on my mind, and this is what that passage says. These are verses 22 to 27. "We know that the whole creation has been groaning as the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for the adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we are saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit itself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts knows the minds of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God." This passage has been such an encouragement to me. It says hope that is seen is no hope at all. Thus, we hold on to a hope that is off in a distant horizon. I think about it a little bit like when you're looking at the horizon off of a seaside or a lake. We believe that the world is round, and yet we don't see its curvature off of the horizon. And thus, we hold on to a hope that we do not see. We might feel inadequate. I don't know about you. I feel weak, exhausted, tired. But the Spirit helps us, and it intercedes on our behalf. And the groaning and the pain in our hearts and in our guts and in our body, let that remind us that the Holy Spirit is groaning wordlessly with the words that we don't even know what to say. And when fatigue overwhelms us, or when we're feeling discouraged, might we be reminded not to give up, even when we want to, and when everything in us just says there's no hope. And yet we also know that all of creation has joined with us in this longing, in this groaning, in this waiting on God, this waiting patiently. I don't feel patient. And yet we hold on to the hope that justice will come, that peace will come, that an end to violence will come. We don't wait inactively. We still seek to be faithful to that which God has called us to do. Each and every day, we will take steps forward. And when we need to rest, we will rest. Individually and collectively, as a community, we will seek to be faithful to the next steps that God has before us. And in the midst of all that, here's some more fodder for prayer. Saturday evening, 2 U.S. officials announced that there is progress on a potential agreement under which Israel could pause military operations against Hamas in Gaza for 2 months in exchange for the release of more than 100 hostages who were captured on October 7th. So there is the potential for a ceasefire. The deal would be over 2 phases. The first phases would be a cessation in fighting, I assume by both parties, the IDF and Hamas, in exchange for the release of women, elderly, and wounded hostages. And Israel and Hamas would then aim to work out the deals during the first 30 days of the pause for a second phase, which could allow for Israeli soldiers and civilian men to be released. The emerging deal would call for Israel to allow for also more humanitarian aid into Gaza. U.S. officials are hopeful that such a deal would lay the groundwork for a durable resolution to the conflict. So that is fodder for our prayer as we hold on to this hope. John Kirby has said we should not expect any imminent developments, and but that this could lead to an end of the war. And after I made preparations for sharing my update today, we also just heard news. It's mid-afternoon on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. Today, on January 28th, we also know that there was an attack on U.S. forces in Jordan near the Syrian border, and 3 U.S. service members were killed. This is the first death of U.S. service members since the Gaza war began, and 25 additional were injured. This was at a U.S. base in northeast Jordan near the Syrian border. And according to the New York Times, the attack will put pressure on the Biden administration, which is said to have been conducted by Iranian-backed militia. It'll put pressure on the Biden administration to respond more forcibly as turmoil grows in the Middle East. So there's much to pray on and much to hope for as we trust in God and as our spirits continue to groan. May God go before us.